I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this inaugural ceremony. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. Community radio movement in India is not a very old movement. The first guidelines, the government guidelines on community radio came out in the year 2000, which was subsequently amplified in 2006. And in 2006, for the first time, we actually encouraged NGOs to really get into this initiative. Post 2006, it's my understanding that the community radio movement has gathered momentum. I understand that we have now 126 community radio stations which are operational, and around 300 more which have been given permission to start the operations, but are in the process of setting up the infrastructure, and hopefully next 6 months or 1 year, or maybe a little more than that, roughly 450 community radio stations will be operational in India. If you take the base in the year 2007 or 2008, you will say that the growth has actually been very spectacular. 4 times or 5 times. In the last 2 years actually it has had a 200% growth. It's very commendable, and I must congratulate the team in the ministry led by Joint Secretary. I have had the pleasure of associating with this kind of an activity when I was Additional Secretary in the ministry roughly a year and a half ago. And I think at that point of time, I came to know about this field of activity a little better. And now, as Secretary, I think in the last 2 years, there has been a very, very significant progress. But if you look at the total requirement of the country, look at the area of the country, look at the population of the country, then the density of community radio stations in comparison to the population that this country has, we perhaps need to cover much more ground. And I am very confident that the way we are moving in this direction and the way the response has been from the stakeholders, I would not be very surprised that in the next 5-year period, that is right by 2017, let's say, we should have anything between 2,000 to 5,000 community radio stations in the country. Well, to say that community radio system, this particular kind of stream of propagation of information, even entertainment, is very unique, is merely underlying something which is very commonly known. To my mind, I think the most important distinction between other means of propagation as you have, like FM radio stations or news radios, and community radios, community radio station is the fact that while media actually manipulates people, and I'm not using manipulation in a derogatory sense, it's a very, very the correct sense of this thing, of the word. In the community radio stations, it's the people actually who manipulate. It's a very, very important distinction. In any other way in which you spread information or education or entertainment or whatever you have to really offer, it's basically centric to the people who actually own it. This system, the community radio system, is where the people actually know what is to be done and how it is to be done. As a matter of fact, it's the community which is both the benefactor and the beneficiary, because it is the one which is creating those content which benefit the community, and community, they themselves are the beneficiary of this whole thing. And the third distinction which I find is that, and unlike other means or other modes, this is bottoms up. It's not top down. the content is not created somewhere else, as happens in other modes, where the content is created in selected centers, and then that is actually transmitted across the country or in that particular areas. Here the content is created at the ground level, and then the content is propagated to its actually the audience group or the community which constitutes the audience group. So it's extremely unique. But we must also remember that community radio is not an FM radio station. And it will be a great tragedy and great misfortune if somehow an impression gains ground that a community radio station is a substitute or a supplant for an FM radio station. For the simple reason that the whole objective for setting up a community radio station is very, very different. It is not a commercial propagation. If commerce is there, it is essentially to ensure that it becomes sustainable. Commerce is not the prime end of setting up a community radio station. The prime objective of setting up a community radio station is communities empowerment. Communities empowerment, that's the thing which actually distinguishes or which actually qualifies community radio station. And if we are able to do that, which I think, if not in full measure, but at least in substantial measure we are doing it, which is evident from what I saw just now, 100 plus or 70, 80 plus exhibitions that we just now saw, that it is in fact moving in that direction. And I thought it would be perhaps appropriate that we remind and keep on reminding ourselves that the basic objective of community radio station is to ensure that the communities are empowered. Every other thing which actually makes it more sustainable is incidental to this new objective. So that necessary fact we must remember all the time. We in the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, we are very upbeat about the future of community radio stations in India. As I mentioned, we would like certainly 1,000 community radio stations to be set up, definitely in next 3, 4, 5 years. Maybe, ideally, we would like about 5,000 community radio stations to be set up, which is not an impossible task. Something which actually is very, very feasible, and I'll explain how it is feasible. In this next 5-year plan, we have actually predicted a very, very ambitious target for the expansion of community radio stations. And our proposals actually include a proposal on giving some kind of a financial incentive, because I understand, and perhaps this is common consensus among the stakeholders, that one of the stumbling blocks, one of the challenges that this movement is facing is resources, particularly the financial resources. And maybe we need to think out of box, to think of innovative solutions as to how to really meet this challenge of attracting financial resources for the expansion of the service. I would like to take this opportunity to maybe spell out what we are thinking in the ministry in terms of our roadmap for community radio stations, and also maybe the areas, specific areas on which the ministry is actually going to work and working is going to work. I can actually identify 7 distinct areas where ministry is going to work. The first area is about awareness generation. In the last 4, 5, 6 years, we have developed, or we have gathered, we have acquired a lot of experience in this regard. And I think the need now is to really build up on that kind of experience and knowledge that we have actually acquired. Last 4, 5 years, we have been holding awareness camps in several parts of the country. We have gone to remote areas, we have gone to areas which are absolutely virgin, and we have gone to areas which have a lot of potential. I think the time has come when, based on our experience and information that we have, we must go into the business of awareness generation in a more efficient and cost-effective manner. We also also needs to address, while on this, the issue of areas which are absolutely not covered by this movement. Today, 4 states, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra and Karnataka. These 4 states actually have more than 50% of all community radio stations in the country. And there are certain states which have very few or perhaps none. I think there's a need actually to ensure that community radio movement actually reaches those states as well. And when we talk about awareness generation, I think we need to focus it in a very, very systematic manner so that the resources that we put and several levels of awareness generation is possible. We need not actually do the same thing across the country. Every area would need perhaps a tailor-made kind of awareness generation program and different level of awareness generation which needs to be really done. The second thing is, of course, which is entirely in the domain of the ministry, but also will require a lot of inputs from all of you, is how do we really further rationalize and simplify the procedure for getting the permission and operationalizing the radio station. I am glad to say that we have reduced the time that we used to take earlier from roughly 1.5 years to 5 to 6 months now. But I think even 5 to 6 months is a long time and we need to reduce it further. We will be applying our mind that several innovations have been introduced. Now I understand that the applications are made online, but this whole thing has to be strengthened further. And we have to see that clearances are got much more quickly, and we create mechanisms whereby such delays are obviated or at least minimized to the extent possible. While on this subject, I would also like to underline that a great deal of facilitation can come if people who apply for the licenses, the permission, they understand what is the requirement of the government. Several times, I'm sure, delays occur because the application itself is deficient. So while on one hand we need to rationalize and simplify procedure, the stakeholders, the applicants, or potential applicants must also ensure that they apply and give full details and full information right in the beginning. The third area is of course the capacity building and the capacity enhancement. And this capacity is of several natures. One dimension of capacity building is building technical capabilities. Running a community radio station is to a large extent a technical matter. To understand what a transmitter is, to understand what an antenna is, to understand what an ERP is, and to ensure that these equipments are properly acquired and properly maintained is something which is a matter of skill. So those skills, I think, needs to be acquired by the operators of community radio stations. Another dimension of capacity building is managerial capacities, including capabilities to really look at the finances, manage the finances. And the third dimension of capacity building is in terms of content generation. How do you really generate content which is from the community and at the same time create the right mix which sustain people's interest? So this is an extremely important facet of this movement, and I think we need to really focus on them in concrete programs, in concrete and very, very focused programs as to what do we do in terms of capacity building. The fourth dimension is how do we really ensure, sustain and increase the involvement of the community both in the management and in the running of this community radio station. Large number of community radio stations today, we must admit, perhaps need to really improve upon this dimension. This is key to this particular movement. How do you really make sure that this sustains not only the government's participation in terms of managing that, owning that, maintaining that, enhancing that, expanding that, improving that. Not only that is actually ensured, but it is also sustained and improved and increased. So that's an extremely important dimension that we need to work on. The fifth dimension is in terms of recording the best practices. I think community radio stations are not unique to India. They are global in nature. And we have experiences across the globe. Several of these experiences have been documented. And I think we need to really work from them. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. I mean, the wheel has been invented by somebody. We only need to know how it was done and how do we adapt that particular thing in our context. So we really need to do that. We also need to document best practices within our own country. I think there are wonderful examples of what community radio stations have done for community empowerment. So we really need to look at it, the compilation, documentation of best practices, innovations, experimentations that have been done across the country. Document them and spread them, disseminate them, and let people learn from each other as to what, and then perhaps improve upon that. So that's the fifth thing. The sixth thing, which I think is becoming more and more relevant, how do we really leverage community radio stations in terms of specific things like disaster management? How do you really leverage the presence of the community radio stations in that area when, if suppose, an earthquake takes place, or there's a flood, or there's a cyclone? Across the globe, community radio stations have played a very, very important role. Last tsunami, which hit Indonesia and neighboring countries, I think it's the community radio stations which are the first one which actually disseminated information about this. In our country, which is every year, at least half a dozen times, natural disasters strike, big natural disasters strike us in some part of the country or the other. I think this role of community radio has to be really understood and its potential realized to really help disseminate information, not merely disseminate information, but a host of other things that go along with this. Lastly, the financial sustainability. That's an issue which is an extremely important issue. Mechanical response to a financial sustainability issue perhaps is to say that government must come up with a scheme to financially assist community radio stations. Conceptually, it's not a bad idea, but in terms of administrative operability, administrative execution of this idea, there are several problems. What should be the mode of financial assistance? Should it be outright grant? And if it should be outright grant, how much it should be? Should it be linked to certain aspects like infrastructure or equipment? Or it should be a matching grant that let the community radio organization setting up the community radio stations, they come up with X amount of resources and government matches with X amount of resources. Should it be a grant or should it be a loan? Then should there be a means test? Should everybody who applies for a community radio stations get that grant, or should it be selective? Now, there are several things which actually go deeper into it. I personally feel that we need to really do a little more than what exists today. I have a feeling that a body like this, which is essentially innovative in its approach and thinking, can come up with something which is more innovative and more out of the box than what kinds of models, financial incentives we have today that we encounter. And I request Supriya to really impress upon this gathering, this very eminent gathering, that they must look at this particular dimension with a very, very different eye. I do have some ideas, but I do not really want to preempt that. And I would certainly expect at the end of this conference, this Sammelan, that in terms of financial sustainability, I'm not merely worried about a certain scheme of Government of India which offers financial incentive to community radio stations. Well, that is only one small dimension of the whole thing. It's a much longer and a much bigger question. How do you, what mechanisms do you really adopt which makes community radio stations sustainable, financially sustainable in the long run? So that's the second. The last one is of course a concurrent evaluation of this whole movement. I think this nothing actually brings you back on the road, on the rails, better than an objective concurrent evaluation of this whole program. So these are the 7 dimensions which I have in my mind, which are the constituents of the roadmap which the ministry has actually prepared for the expansion of the community radio movement in the country. I took some time actually to expand it because I wanted to share it with all of you, and I would be extremely happy to get a feedback on it. What else you would like the ministry to do, in what other way you would like the ministry, and what other area you would like the ministry to actually cover. Because we're just beginning to really, we have a fairly detailed roadmap in front of us, but that is one which can always be modified or could be improved upon. 2 more issues I want to share with you, and then I will end. I think you all are very waiting eagerly to listen to the Honorable Minister. I think there is a possibility of greater amount of research input in this area. I was just making a back of the envelope calculation. If we have 2,000 community radio stations coming up in the next 5 years, and each one, even suppose in terms of equipment, transmitter and antenna, if the investment is roughly of the tune of say about 5 lakh rupees, $500,000 rupees, then about 2,000 community radio stations would require an investment of roughly 1,000 billion rupees, which is 100 crore rupees. So 100 crore rupees, 2,000 transmitters, 2,000 antenna is a fairly big volume. And I think we need to really work out. It's a big amount of money, as a matter of fact, for a very, very specialized kind of thing. I think there is enough scope for us to really put research inputs in this. And Basil is here. I find CMD sitting somewhere here, and I think he's here. I think Basil should take an initiative. I understand that in the last your exhibition of the Broadcast Engineer Society (BES), somebody was showing me in the Basil pavilion that they have developed a transmitter. The gentleman from Bangalore is here who has developed that?
He has gone back.
Oh, he's gone back.
But anyway, the equipment
which I was told costs roughly about 2.5 lakh rupees. I think all of you should actually have a look at it. I think there is enough possibility, enough potential for us to really concentrate on this. We must actually look at it. How can we make cheaper technologies available? After all, the licenses of community radio stations are not like FM licenses or like channel licenses. They are people who have very moderate means, and I think we need to really work to see and ensure that technologies. And I think it's a huge volume, and I think it makes sense, at least it makes sense to me, to really concentrate some energy and some thinking on this direction. Lastly, I must say that you are at the community radio. Let us not forget that you are sitting or owning a very, very precious national resource. The spectrum, a radio wave is a very, very precious national resource. And therefore, it's imperative that the community radio station is put into operation for a significant length of time in consonance with its objectives. Spectrum spotting or wave spotting, or not really putting the radio stations within a reasonable period of time is something which is neither desirable nor perhaps government will be able to permit. So a word of caution that we need to be very, very particular that we must do all that we can to set up, operationalize the commission as soon